The screams pierced through Mercy General Hospital like shattered glass. For 48 hours straight, the newborn's cries had echoed down every corridor, seeping into every room, driving staff and visitors to the edge of madness. No amount of formula, rocking, or medical intervention could silence the infant's anguish. Adrian Cole stood motionless beside the glass crib, his 6-foot frame trembling with exhaustion. His navy suit, once pristine and commanding, now hung wrinkled and stained with perspiration. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his usually perfect hair fell disheveled across his forehead. The man who had built a billion-dollar empire, through sheer determination, looked utterly defeated. "Sir, we've tried everything," Dr. Matthews said, approaching cautiously. "The baby is physically healthy. All tests show normal results. But he won't stop crying." Adrian's jaw clenched. "Then try harder. Run more tests. Bring in specialists. I don't care what it costs." His voice cracked, betraying the desperation he tried to hide. The truth was unbearable. 2 days ago, his wife Amelia had died from complications during childbirth. The woman who had softened his rough edges, who had shown him what love truly meant, was gone forever. Now all he had left was this screaming child, who seemed to echo the pain tearing through his own heart. Nurses whispered among themselves, their faces drawn with fatigue. They had worked around the clock, but nothing could comfort the grieving infant. The baby's cries seemed to communicate something beyond hunger or discomfort. It was as if the child understood, on some primal level, that the most important person in his world had vanished. Adrian pressed his palms against his temples, trying to block out the sound that was slowly driving him insane. His empire meant nothing now. His wealth was powerless against this tiny person suffering. For the first time in his life, Adrian Cole faced a problem that money could not solve. The crying continued, relentless and heartbreaking, filling the hospital with a grief that seemed to have no end. The hospital staff moved like zombies through their shifts. The baby's cries had become a constant soundtrack of misery that wore down everyone within hearing distance. Visitors complained. Other patients requested room changes. The situation was becoming impossible to manage. Adrian hadn't left the hospital in 3 days. He survived on coffee and vending machine sandwiches, unable to abandon his son despite feeling utterly helpless. Every medical expert in the city had been consulted. Pediatric specialists, child psychologists, even alternative healers had tried their methods. Nothing worked. "Perhaps we should consider sedation," suggested Dr. Matthews during the morning rounds. "Just enough to help him sleep." "No," Adrian snapped. "I won't drug my son into silence. There has to be another way." That's when she appeared. Sarah Washington had been living on the streets for 8 months, ever since losing her apartment after her baby died. She had wandered into the hospital seeking warmth, hoping to rest in the waiting area without being noticed. But the sound of the crying baby stopped her cold. She stood frozen in the doorway, her heart hammering against her ribs. The cry was identical to the sound that had haunted her dreams for months. Her own son Marcus had cried exactly like that during his final days, when pneumonia ravaged his tiny lungs and she had no money for proper medical care. Sarah's appearance shocked the well-dressed visitors in the pediatric ward. Her coat was torn and dirty, her shoes worn through at the soles. Her dark skin was marked with the harsh lines that come from sleeping rough and grieving hard. But her eyes held a depth of understanding that made several people step back instinctively. A security guard noticed her immediately. "Ma'am, you can't be here. This is a private ward." But Sarah couldn't move. The baby's cries pulled at something deep inside her, a maternal instinct that death hadn't been able to destroy. She knew that sound. She had lived with it. She had held her own child as he made those exact same desperate noises, calling for comfort that she couldn't provide. "Wait," she whispered, taking a step toward the sound. "That baby, he's not sick. He's mourning." The pediatric ward fell silent except for the baby's continued wailing. Staff members exchanged uncomfortable glances as the homeless woman moved closer to the nursery. Her words hung in the air like an accusation, challenging everything the medical professionals had tried. "Security." Adrian's voice boomed across the corridor. He emerged from his son's room, his face flushed with anger and desperation. "Get this woman out of here immediately." But Sarah didn't retreat. She stood her ground, her eyes fixed on the screaming infant visible through the nursery window. "That cry," she said, her voice growing stronger. "I know what it means. He's calling for his mother." "His mother is dead," Adrian snarled, his pain transforming into rage. "And you have no business being here." The security guards moved toward Sarah, but she continued speaking, her words cutting through the tension like a blade. "My son cried like that for 3 weeks before he died. The doctor said he was fine too. They gave him medicines, ran tests, tried everything. But I knew what was wrong." Adrian stopped advancing, something in her tone giving him pause. "He wasn't crying because he was sick," Sarah continued, tears beginning to stream down her cheeks. "He was crying because he knew I couldn't save him. He was crying because he felt my fear, my helplessness. Babies know when the person who's supposed to protect them is broken." Dr. Matthews stepped forward, his voice clinical but gentle. "Ma'am, while we appreciate your concern, this situation requires professional medical attention." Sarah laughed bitterly. "Professional attention? How's that working out for you?" She gestured toward the nursery where the baby's cries had intensified. "That child has been screaming for days, and none of your expertise has helped him." Adrian's hands trembled as he watched his son thrash in the crib. The woman's words struck too close to the truth he had been avoiding. He was broken. His wife's death had shattered him completely, and perhaps his son could sense that devastating loss. "What would you know about it?" he whispered, his voice hollow. "You're nothing. You have nothing." Sarah met his eyes directly, unflinching. "I know because I've stood where you're standing. I've held a dying child and felt completely powerless, and I know what that baby needs." The confrontation in the corridor drew more staff members. Whispers spread quickly through the pediatric ward about the homeless woman, who claimed to understand what medical professionals could not. Some nurses looked skeptical, others curious, but all were desperate for any solution to the crisis that had consumed their workplace. "I lost my son 6 months ago," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the tears flowing freely down her face. "Marcus was born premature. I worked 3 jobs trying to pay for his medical care, but it wasn't enough. When he got pneumonia, I couldn't afford the treatments he needed." Adrian's anger began to crumble as he watched the stranger's genuine anguish. Her pain was raw, unfiltered by wealth or social status. It was the same grief that was eating him alive from the inside. "He cried just like your son is crying now," Sarah continued. "Not from hunger or discomfort, but from loss. He could feel that I was losing him, that I couldn't be the mother he needed. And when he died in my arms, the silence was worse than all the crying." Dr. Matthews cleared his throat uncomfortably. "While we sympathize with your loss, ma'am, we can't allow unauthorized individuals to interfere with patient care." "Let her try," Adrian said suddenly, surprising everyone including himself. "Let her hold him." The medical staff erupted in protests, but Adrian raised his hand for silence. "Nothing else has worked. My son has been suffering for days, and all your medical knowledge hasn't helped him. If this woman thinks she can comfort him, then let her try." Sarah approached the nursery slowly, her hands shaking as she reached for the baby. The moment her fingers touched the infant's skin, something extraordinary happened. The baby's screams didn't stop immediately, but they changed. The desperate, panicked quality shifted to something softer, more questioning. "He recognizes grief," Sarah whispered, lifting the child carefully. "He knows I understand what he's feeling." As she held the baby against her chest, his cries gradually subsided to whimpers. For the first time in days, the hospital corridor experienced moments of blessed quiet. The infant's tiny fist clutched at Sarah's worn shirt, and his breathing began to slow. Adrian watched in amazement as his son found the peace that had eluded him for so long. The transformation was miraculous. As Sarah held the baby against her chest, his desperate cries faded to soft whimpers, then to the normal breathing of a sleeping infant. The hospital corridor, which had echoed with anguish for days, finally experienced blessed silence. Adrian stared in disbelief. His billion-dollar fortune, the best medical care money could buy, teams of specialists, None of it had accomplished what this homeless woman achieved in minutes. His legs gave way, and he sank into a nearby chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was witnessing. "How?" he whispered, his voice breaking. Sarah rocked the baby gently, tears still flowing down her cheeks. He needed to feel understood. When Marcus was dying, strangers would try to comfort me by saying everything would be okay. But the only people who really helped were other mothers who had lost children. They didn't try to fix my pain, they just recognized it. She carefully placed the sleeping infant back in Adrian's arms. The baby stirred slightly but remained calm, his small face peaceful for the first time since birth. "Your son knows his mother is gone," Sarah continued softly. "He can feel your grief, and it terrifies him because he doesn't understand it. But when I held him, he felt someone who understood loss, someone who had survived it." Adrian looked down at his son, finally quiet in his arms. The child's tiny features were so much like Amelia's that it took his breath away. "I don't know how to do this without her," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "Neither did I," Sarah replied. "But we learn, we survive, and we love them the best we can." For several minutes, they stood together in the quiet corridor, a billionaire and a homeless woman, united by loss and newfound hope. Finally, Adrian looked up at Sarah, his eyes red but determined. "What's your name?" he asked. "Sarah Washington." "Sarah," he said carefully, "I want to offer you something. Not charity, but partnership. Help me raise my son. Teach me how to heal from this grief. In return, let me help you rebuild your life." Sarah's eyes widened in surprise, but she saw sincerity in his face. Sometimes healing comes from the most unexpected places, through the most unlikely connections. As the baby slept peacefully between them, both knew their lives had changed forever.